Wrecked is by far Fortnite's most alienating and fundamentally flawed season. The truth is, Chapter 5 as a whole has altered Fortnite's DNA quite significantly, to the point that many would consider it the game's worst chapter. While that might sound like a heavy statement to make, it's not surprising that many have come to this conclusion, especially after Season 3. As I cover the three main categories, the map, the loot pool, and overall content/quality of life changes, you will come to recognize how deeply flawed Fortnite Wrecked really is. Despite this, I want to make it abundantly clear that you are completely justified in enjoying this season, even if on a more critical level it falls apart. However, if you're going to dismiss criticism I have on the basis that you liked a certain change, something this season highlights in particular is the lack of necessity for bullet drop based weapons in the game. As I've pointed out many times, it seems like the incentive for implementing bullet drop is to appeal to this insatiable need Epic has for innovation. This results in a lack of understanding of how these changes could positively impact the gameplay loop. Rather than using bullet drop to allow ARs to be overall stronger, with the caveat being leading your shots, Season 3 opted for what I can only describe as the most clunky and irritating set of ARs in any season. The choice for such an abysmal and ineffective assault rifle pool seemed to be another effort on Epic's end to boost the viability of cars during this season, which, trust me, is something we're going to get into later. That being said, with the addition of the combat AR and the tri-beam laser rifle, they were so close to creating what I had hoped would be the goal behind projectile-based gunplay in the first place, a level of variety within the loot pool. Imagine if you could pick between a weapon that was incredibly accurate, with the downside being that you would have to lead your shots, and a hit scan weapon that featured a decent bit of bloom, requiring you to tap fire more often. Well, if you thought that was going to be the case with these two weapons, then get fucked. Honestly, it's just kind of disappointing because this is such a missed opportunity to give some real life and direction behind the innovation that is bullet drop, rather than it just being this soulless, meaningless husk that defenders of Chapter 5 can point towards when attempting to satisfy the innovation argument. Really, none of the assault rifles present or added during the grueling runtime of Wrecked were anything more than mediocre at best, and downright wet napkin shooters at worst. One of the few additions worth praising this season was the re-addition of the combat shotgun, of course with the lovely Chapter 5 reskin. Now, I shouldn't get ahead of myself because while I personally enjoyed the combat's return, it doesn't really do much to enrich the shotgun meta.
He's right behind me, isn't he?
You're mine now.
The Gatekeeper was still the dominant weapon despite the combat being a great potential replacement. It honestly makes no sense to add a weapon that serves practically the same functionality as the Gatekeeper, with the difference being that it's worse in almost every single way, apart from its larger magazine size. It's sad because this season also managed to create an actually really well balanced version of the combat shotgun, but there was no realm of possibility that this thing was ever going to be more viable than the Gatekeeper.
I feel pretty sorry for the next guy who looks at me funny.
What about that guy?
Don't be silly. He's not bothering anybody.
But seeing as there are still so many issues we have yet to discuss with this season, there is no way that something on this level of gameplay was ever to be addressed on Epic's end. And to this day, the Gatekeeper runs rampant due to its balancing going unchecked. Oh, I should also mention that the hammer pump was in the loot pool this season in case you forgot.
We do not care.
The medallions in Season 3 were a problem to say the least. My main complaints with the Season 2 medallions was how much better the Grim Gate and Underworld ones were. This essentially meant that if you wanted a better chance at winning the game, you were restricted to landing one of these two POIs, which heavily detracted from the other new locations. I guess Epic took my complaints to heart because instead of making only one broken medallion, they decided to make three. Their attributes include granting shield over time, infinite nitro, and infinite ammo medallions. To add to the mess of medallions, the new Boombolt this season was given a mythic variant paired along the infinite ammo medallion, which, if you're unaware, the Boombolt requires rocket ammo, which doesn't stack that high. This hindered the Boombolt a decent bit because you couldn't infinitely spray someone with it. And given that, I'm sure you can imagine the problem with giving a mythic version of this weapon to the boss with the infinite ammo medallion. The Nitro Splash and Nitro Fist can be best categorized as anti-building changes. It's no secret that Epic Games over the years has grown to resent what the building mechanic is capable of. While I understand the concern for allowing sweats to run rampant in your game, Chapter 5 Season 3 doesn't handle the situation in a very healthy way. I will get into what I mean by that a little bit later, as I'm not trying to constantly repeat myself, but it should be noted that creating changes that fulfill this anti-building agenda is an example of a larger issue that Epic have contrived for themselves. The Nitro Fist and Splash were both comically broken rotational items, putting the existing issues of having an overabundance of item rotation behind. These items seem to serve one main purpose of allowing you to gain easy access to an unsuspecting player's box. There is full stop no defense against these items, and because of this, they quite literally are a must-run item this season if you want to win. It should go without saying, but having items that weigh significantly in a meta contributes to a loot pool that lacks any variety whatsoever. It was bad enough that the shotguns and spray weapons are entirely black and white when it comes to the better option, but now you have an additional 2 items that offer such a heavy advantage, which just removes any chance of there being any level of differing playstyles within the Fortnite Wrecked loot pool. Chapter 5 as a whole is a very difficult map to talk about because I find most of its locations to be incredibly mediocre, but not for the basic reasons you might expect. A common theme present with this map is this more hyper-realistic look when it comes to the locations. Now, I'm not sure why this description triggers a lot of people into this caveman brain where they have to argue against it, but a simple eye test proves this notion. These locations, just by a simple comparison, look infinitely more realistic than anything offered in prior chapters. The issue lies in the fact that these locations value spectacle over gameplay, and this results in incredibly awkward layouts or locations that just don't function well within the building grid. I think the most egregious example of this during Season 3 is the Nitrodrome. I understand the intention behind this POI being a center point on the map for cars to engage in fights, but it just makes looting the location extremely obnoxious when you have to wrap all the way around the outside of the building to avoid getting caught in the center. Look, I can't really levy much criticism against the other new POIs because they all take up portions of the map that didn't feature locations to begin with, so by default they are better than nothing. An extremely silly change during this season was the lake's water level being decreased significantly. Like most changes with this season, this was geared towards an indirect buff to the unpleasant car gameplay that festered in this season, because God forbid there's an area on the map where driving your nearly 2,000 health, turret spamming, and building demolishing car isn't accessible. In fact, it seems like they applied the same logic to the entire desert area. Usually desert biomes in Fortnite are filled with Monument Valley levels of terrain and interesting land to traverse, but nope, this shit is flatter than the earth, because if they hadn't generated this super flat world for the new desert biome, it might actually present some difficulty behind driving the cars, and we just can't have that. The only other major change to the map was the needlessly large nerf to snooty steps. I don't know what the thought process was behind making a POI that was already hurting after the removal of its medallion even worse, but similar to the changes made to Greasy Grove during Chapter 3 Season 3, it just seems like they ran out of ideas for any meaningful changes to this location. I should start by saying that cars in Fortnite are not the direct issue with Chapter 5 Season 3. Cars were initially added back in Chapter 2 Season 3, and despite their modern day issues, they were handled very well. There seemed to be a large emphasis on not making any one car more powerful than another. The car that featured the most health was the semi-truck, with 1200 HP total. However, the main trade-off to this was that the semi featured only 2 seats, and was incredibly slow when compared to the other vehicles. Most other cars had around 800 HP total, but were significantly faster. There were, of course, other smaller trade-offs like the truck offering a better off-road handling, and while some of these differences may seem small, it did make a genuine difference when deciding which car to drive.
They're not too overpowered, I'm not gonna lie.
This one's a good one,
It's really easy to kill people inside of them.
Yeah, I will not be playing this season.
Also, I think the fact that there's no missiles, there's no acceleration, makes them a lot more balanced.
Ah, look at you, so young and happy. Where do the years go?
Fast forward to Chapter 5 Season 3, and the cars are practically different vehicles entirely from their Chapter 2 counterparts. The only distinguishable differences between the two cars are the number of people each can hold, and there being a higher health point for the larger of the two vehicles. Now, I understand that Season 3 is not entirely to blame for this. With the metaverse, Epic launched the Rocket Racing mode, and with it came the ability to customize the look of your car. To better incentivize players to acquire these cosmetics for a mode that no one plays, Epic drastically shifted the diversity of vehicles in BR from around around 4 unique vehicles to only 2. Chapter 5 Season 3 took this a step further by giving both vehicles the ability to boost without significantly draining the fuel, and increasing the health for the Whiplash to around 1400 and the Jeep to around 1700 total. It should be noted that the vehicles in Chapter 5 have little to no difficulty whatsoever with handling off-road. These factors on its own present a myriad of issues, but if there's one common theme that Wrecked presents, it's the fact that it can always get worse. The most controversial part of the season were the vehicle attachments. These gave extremely high health vehicles an offensive capability and completely removed the necessity to engage in grounded gunplay fights. Having vehicles that can blast through builds, provide counterfire, all while protecting its user, is not only extremely broken, but leads to a lack of incentive for using the building mechanic. This complete fundamental shift in the way players engage in fights takes away a significant part of the game's identity as a building game. Changes that alter the core gameplay to an unrecognizable degree in no way belong in Fortnite. Naturally, this statement in and of itself sparked much debate around the community. The immediate defense was these changes alter the formula of Fortnite. I honestly don't even understand how that's a defense. Like, no shit they do, that's the issue. Altering the formula of something doesn't inherently make it better. You can point to countless changes throughout the game's history that do just that, but not in a positive way, and Chapter 5 Season 3 is no different. And by this point, the main argument gets shifted to the many counters and nerfs that were implemented throughout the season. However, the major drawbacks that come with introducing counters consist of more unbalanced items like seen with the Boogie Bomb,
I know what kind of man you are.
or items that are solely run for the sake of a counter. Having to sacrifice an inventory slot for something like EMPs will help with an easier fighting experience, but deepens the already existing issue of a lack of variety within playstyles when you are yet again forced to run another must-have item. The ideal way of tackling a counter to something would be a built-in feature, not something where you are required to hold a specific item which entails RNG.
Come with me if you want to live.
But rather a feature, playstyle, or mechanic built into the game that allows you to counter the enemy's attack. Even looking at it from a very basic perspective, the main counter to being shot out in the open is simply putting up a wall. Even currently with cars, there is a counter to players running if you swing your pickaxe as you are entering their vehicle. It's a simple yet effective counter that anyone can perform that isn't reliant on broken items or sacrificing an inventory spot. And then there's of course the nerfs that many point to as the quote-unquote fix to the car problem. I've discussed this before, but Epic has this unique ability of gaslighting their community when it comes to nerfs. Essentially, they will make something so incredibly unbalanced that any nerf applied, no matter how seemingly significant, doesn't impact it that heavily. We saw the same thing back in Season X with the mechs, and they applied the same logic to the cars in Season 3. If they have a specified target power level for the vehicles, it's easier to achieve it by propping it up past that point. Then, when the nerfs are applied, defenders of the season can point to this as healthy change, Epic can have the initial intended values, and it's significantly more difficult to complain about because by comparison they are worse, even if they remain broken. But even if you still want to argue that these changes made them balanced, I don't really see what that changes. Epic Games understands how these changes impact the game. It's not some kind of surprise to them when people don't end up enjoying this one-sided content. Reload was a last-ditch effort to scrape back players for this season, and while it had some success, the damage was already done. Yes, significant nerfs were applied, and Ranked now featured a different loot pool with no cars, but this idea of releasing a game or change in a fundamentally broken or unfinished state deals a hefty blow to its perception later on, and it's an absolutely rancid way of developing a game. Look, to go back to the points I hinted towards earlier, the cars and other various additions throughout the season are directly created for this anti-building agenda. Epic Games over the years have created countless changes in an effort to create a more casual-friendly experience because of how daunting the building mechanic can seem to some. The problem is these solutions to the sweat problem that Fortnite faces are nothing more than lazy and a complete waste of time. We have the benefit of hindsight to know that the cars and their surrounding changes did not survive the launch of Season 4. Vehicle mods do not provide any level of meaningful innovation, and the way they were handled is indicative of that. The cars back in Season 3 of Chapter 2 were given a level of purpose. The max HP a vehicle featured was 1200 compared to the staggering 2000 plus that some of the boss mythic cars showcased. And even then, the semi came with its trade-offs. These changes were made to last, and up until the point where they were needlessly stripped from the game for the sake of cosmetics, they did. Cars, on the other hand, are not made to fulfill some level of innovation that they get misrepresented as, but rather to ensure an easier experience for a casual player. This results in deeply flawed gameplay and much argumentation about these one-sided decisions. This is not the fault of any community, and the idea that it is extremely childish. Epic have had countless opportunities to benefit Fortnite, but time and time again, they have shown much laziness to the most simple of solutions. All of the issues surrounding this season have one common denominator when it comes to blame: Epic Games. This, to me, is undoubtedly Fortnite's worst season, and while I can respect that they made an effort to balance these changes later on, there's no real reason it should have launched in this state in the first place. For those reasons, and the other multitude of issues throughout the map and loot pool, this season is a 2 out of 10. Cars with attachments should have never made it past the drawing board stages, and regardless of the quantity of updates that were produced throughout this season, none of them left a lasting or meaningful impact on the game, let alone a positive one. Obviously, you're allowed to like this season, and if you did, that's completely understandable. There wouldn't be so much debate among the community if this season didn't appeal to anyone, but you should be able to recognize flawed content when it's present. Before I end, I wanted to mention that this video was supposed to come out at the end of Season 3, but I simply just didn't have enough time to work on it up until now. But since it's out, I can stop throwing strays towards this season in every single video I make, and we can finally move past the mess that is Fortnite Wrecked. But if you're still starved for more flinging of shit towards Season 3, Leo has a phenomenal video going in depth about the season that I will link in the description below. Also, I and some other content creators who discuss the game are featured in that video. Lastly, I now have a creator code, Mudgy, because if there's anything I have in common with Epic Games, it's that I like money. Anyways, thank you for watching and have a great day.